Hi, and welcome back to another Unity C# tutorial. In this tutorial video, I will be demonstrating some issues that can happen when you try to export a package in Unity that result in hidden references to game objects that you're no longer using, as well as workarounds for those particular situations. And then I'll be submitting this video to the Unity QA team so that hopefully they can fix this and make the workflow a little easier for the users. So let's get started. I have the latest version of Unity installed, so I'm going to make a Unity 2019.2.17.f1 package just to prove that this is something that still exists. And we're just going to call this I'm just going to call it export bugs here. So new project, and just go ahead and hit create. And then we'll go ahead and we'll just create a really simple setup here so we can demonstrate these bugs and then demonstrate how to work around them. And I'm going to go through this just sort of demonstrating a simple standard workflow that a developer may encounter here. So we're going to create a couple folders. First of all, we're going to call this first one do not export me, and we're going to call this second folder here export me. We'll need a folder as well for our C# scripts, and in our scene here we will need to create a new empty, and we're going to call this our spawn manager. So our spawn manager is going to be responsible for spawning stuff. So let's pretend that we're making a game here. So I'm just going to create a new 3D cube here, and then in the do not export me folder I am going to create a new material right here, and this is going to be called our red dev material. So we'll just give it a color of red here, and there we go. So this is our red development cube. This is a cube, it's like super overpowered. Let's pretend this is like maybe a GM character or something that we use for our development. In our and I'm just going to name this thing dev cube. So I will make a prefab out of our dev cube and I'll pull it into our do not export me folder so we know that this is all dev stuff and we don't ever want this stuff to go in our production build. So now we'll go into the export me folder, and I will create a new material here, and we'll call this our green prod material. So our green prod material is going to be green, like stoplights, right? Red means don't export me, green means we're okay to export. I'm just going to duplicate this cube here, and we're going to call this new copy prod cube. And we can pull this in here and just make an original prefab out of it. And then we are going to, just a second, we'll delete our dev cube from the scene, and now we have our prod cube, and our prod cube has our green material on it. So that's great. Now we can delete both of these prefabs from the scene. So looking here, we got a prod cube, a green prod material, and in our do not export we got a red dev cube and a red dev material, so we're set. So now in our spawn manager we'll need to put a new script on it. So we go create new C# script, and we're just going to call this our spawn manager script, and we're going to double click on it and it's going to open up in Visual Studio, and then we'll make a really simple script here that just goes ahead and spawns our cubes for us. So control AKF, and I'll make a new serialized field, and I'm going to call this a private game object dev cube. And then I'll make a new serialized field, and I'm going to call this a private game object prod cube. And then next up I'm going to, in my start method, I need a string here as well. So at some point I'm going to go serialized field and then private string in environment name equals string.empty. Alright, good. So then if our environment name does not equal null and our environment name equals dev, then we're just going to instantiate our dev cube. And we can do the same thing for prod. So if our environment name equals prod, then we're going to instantiate our prod cube. Okay, great. So now we've got a nice little program here, and we can go to our spawn manager in our scene here, and we're going to add our new spawn manager script. We're going to set the environment name to dev, and we're going to set our references to our dev cube and a reference to our prod cube. Okay, so far so good. Now we've got the best game ever, right? So we can press play here, and look, we got our dev cube. Okay, cool, it's working, and we're going to set that to prod, and we're going to save the scene, and we're going to hit play, and now we got a green cube, we got a prod cube. Okay, perfect. So we got the best game in the world, and we're so proud of our game, and now it's time to export our game, right? So when we export this thing, obviously we don't want to export our dev stuff. So that's great. At some point we decide, okay, well, I don't even want to include this whole concept of like dev fields and prod fields and such. So I'm just going to comment out all this code right here. And I'm just going to get rid of this block of code as well. Actually, you know what? I'm going to keep the environment name in there because it's needed for that other if statement. But it'll, yeah, okay, great. So we just get rid of the dev cube field. And we think, okay, awesome. So now we have no references and everything's all good, right? So we're going to go into our scenes, and we're going to select dependencies, and lo and behold, we have a reference to a dev cube. Right? Even though there's no dev cube in there. So what are we going to do about that? Well, let's see. We can try that. And select dependencies, and it's gone. So that's the first issue right here. Before we went and updated our environment name to some totally useless value, we were actually keeping a hidden reference to that old deserialized object on this thing, and there was no indication to the user at all that that existed. And there's no indication to the user that you just have to do some totally wacky thing, like just rename something to some nonsense value and resave it just to get it to work. And I think Unity's editor here is kind of failing in their workflow at that point, because not only do you not present an option to the user, but you also don't give them a way to fix it without basically completely breaking their project, because I have to update this to some nonsense value basically. So anyway, that's the first workaround. So if you notice that you've still got a hidden reference somewhere, just try renaming anything to a nonsense value. I mean, technically, I suppose you don't have to. I suppose I could go in here and I could add a new field if I didn't want to update one of my existing ones, right? Like I could go in and I could do like environment name fix, for example, like this, and then I wouldn't have to, and then, you know, this is going to appear in my editor like this. And then I could just put garbage in here, and then now it'll allow me to save the scene, right? So now let's examine a far more nefarious scenario of this bug and how we can work around that, because it gets much, much worse here. So let's just delete that field, okay? Now we're going to go back and we're going to say, okay, great, I'm pretending that that I'm back in my development environment. I don't know, maybe we found a reason to go back and we have to start working on this thing again, add a new feature or something, whatever the case is. So I'm going to let this compile, and now you see I've got my fields back, and And I'm going to take and make a reference to my dev cube there, and then I'm actually going to make a prefab out of my spawn manager too. So let's make a prefab out of him, because you need to make a prefab out of this to trigger the next version of the bug that I want to demonstrate. So anyway, we go back into our spawn manager, and notice we now have this new box here, actually this entire new row here that includes this overrides thing, and it says there's no overrides. Okay, great. So let's set that to none. And now you see, okay, cool, we can apply that to the spawn manager, and then I'm just going to pull my dev cube back in there, and okay, great, let's apply that to the prefab spawn manager, right? We're going to save this, and then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to say, okay, great, so, development time is over, it's time to export this package again. So I'm just going to comment this stuff out here. And now I'm going to bring it back. Now looking at this, you look at this and you say, hey, there's no dev cube in there. Okay, cool, so this should work, right? So now I right click on my scene and I go select dependencies, and lo and behold, there's a dev cube there. There's still a reference to it. So this is part 2 of the bug, and part 2 of the bug is even when you add the serialized field back in, Unity is supposed to be keeping a reference like to what the value is in the serialized field, and that's why this bug exists in the first place, because it's some hidden reference on this game object that isn't exposed to the user. But the fact that when you bring it back and it shows you none, yet you'd still see the dev cube in the dependency list is it's a huge bug in my opinion, because I can also go here and I can go to overrides, and there's no overrides. So right here, there's literally zero indication to the user that there's anything wrong here, or like why it thinks there's a reference, especially because we've brought back this field and it says there's none. So you're thinking, okay, well, prod cube's in here and dev cube is empty, so why the heck do I have this reference to dev cube? Once again, go ahead and mess this up to some messed up value, totally screwing up your game, or add another temporary field. Go back to the scenes, make sure you've saved it, select dependencies, and hey look, dev cube is gone. So I think the Unity editor is really sort of failing in there and really needs to do a better job of either, when I re-serialize this value and bring it back, if it's got a reference to the dev cube in another copy of this serialized value, like why isn't it filling this with dev cube again? Because that's like super duper confusing to the user. Alright, but my friend, we're not done yet. It gets even worse. Let's examine how we could make developers pull their hair out for hours. And actually, honestly, if you watched my my last video here on my development live streams, you can see that I spent a 3-hour video. An hour and a half of that was actually troubleshooting this next bug that I'm about to show you a workaround for, and I actually failed to find a workaround in here. It wasn't until after that I actually found it. So I'm going to demonstrate it to you and hopefully save you 3.5 hours of pulling your hair out. So, are you ready for this? Are you ready to see how bad it can really get? We're going to take this dev cube and we're going to pull it in here. Actually, you know what? Control Z, I'm just going to remove that for now. Okay, so we've got our spawn manager, and our spawn manager is a prefab, and we think, okay, good, we're pro developers, we know that we can mess with field names and resave stuff, and we can get rid of these hidden references. So we got this whole problem licked, right? Oh, no we don't. So we're going to take this spawn manager, we're going to go back into the export me folder here, we're going to pull it in here, and we're going to make a prefab variant. Okay, let's get rid of this spawn manager here. We'll pull the spawn manager variant in the scene so we can see it's a variant. Okay, so far so good. Now let's take this do not export me. We'll put the dev cube up there, and we'll apply that as an override in the spawn manager variant. So far so good. We're going to save the scene, and now we're going to go to the scenes and go to the sample scene and right click and select dependencies, and we got a dev cube in there. Cool, we expect that, right? Alright, next up, look look at overrides. There's no overrides. Okay, interesting, because there actually is an override, because I right-clicked on this and went apply as override in Prefab Manager variant. So there is in fact an override, and it's not showing you that. I think this is part of the bug, but let's make things even more confusing for our developers now. So we're going to take this, we're going to comment that field out, we're going to come back in here, and we see that it's gone. Okay, great. So now as a developer, you're thinking, okay, great, I've got no reference to it. I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to the sample scene, I'm going to go select dependencies, and hey, what's this? There's a dev cube. Okay, but that's cool because I'm a pro developer, right? And I know that all I have to do is change this to prod some garbage name, apply this as an override, and then now I can hit save, and now I can go back to my scene, I can go to select dependencies, and whoa, wait a minute, what's happening here? We still got a dev cube. I thought we had this problem licked. I thought we determined that all we had to do was write some garbage in here and it was going to work for us, right? Like, what's going on? And you go back here and you look at overrides, and it's like, hey, there's no overrides. And so you're thinking to yourself, uh-oh. And then, like me in my last video, you spent an hour and a half messing with the game, trying to figure out what's wrong, deleting every object in your scene, trying to figure out which one has this darn hidden reference. So anyway, you're like, okay, well, if there's a reference, it must be in that serialized field, so we're gonna, put the serialized field back, and it's got a value of none, and we're gonna take this prods thing back, and we're gonna apply this as an override, and we're gonna resave our scene here. And now it should work, right? Because we just saved it with no value in the dev cube, so we definitely should have overwritten whatever value was in there, right? So we go to select dependencies, and there it is, it's gone. So that's one way to get rid of it. So basically, what you end up having to do is you have to bring that field back and actually resave the thing with a no value in that field to pretty much get rid of it there. Now, there's another way that you can do this as well, and it's really strange that it doesn't show up until you get there, but let me show you how we can do this. So we're going to go to DevCube here, we're going to apply this as an override in the spawn manager, we're going to save our scene here, then we are going to remove the reference to that field here, save it again. Alright, and now as you can see, we go to sample scenes and we've got this select dependencies, and of course we've still got our dev cube because we've got that hidden reference sitting in there, right? And if you were to just bring it back like this, and you might be thinking to yourself, okay, great, like this, there's nothing to save here, and I can go on my sample scene and I can select dependencies, and of course you've still got the dev cube even though the dev cube field is empty. And if I go to overrides, it tells me there's no overrides, right? But here's something kind of interesting. You can then unpack this prefab, okay, and you can save the scene, and now we've got a reference to the dev cube. So we're thinking, okay, great, we're gonna just remove that serialized field here, and we go back to the scenes and the sample scene, and we go select dependencies, and of course we've still got a reference to the dev cube, right? Here's something really interesting. Notice now if you go into overrides, because we unpacked this prefab variant, it says, hey, there's overrides here, right? Click on individual items to review, revert, and apply. So if I click on this, it says there's no overrides. And if I click on this, it shows me a comparison of two things with the exact same values, prod cube, prod cube, prod, prod. So you're like, well, what exactly am I applying, or what exactly am I reverting here? Because they're completely identical. And what's happening here is like internally, I think it's detecting that there was an override for the dev cube in that previously available serialized value, but it's completely invisible here. So this is another place where I think the Unity editor is failing to show you the information you need, because you're looking at this and you're like, well, why should I apply a revert? Because everything's already exactly the same, right? But yeah, so here's the really interesting thing. If we now go and we hit apply all, and you're like, okay, before this it was 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, prod cube, right? And nothing is really, well, I mean, okay, let's just apply those, right? So now we've got nothing bold, right? We look at this and we're like, well, nothing is bold, so there's nothing to apply, right? But if I hit apply all and then save the scene and go back into the scene, even though none of the values changed, if I go select dependencies, my dev cube is gone. So I think the apply all there is really sort of failing. When you look at that overrides list, it should be showing you the other, the hidden like serialized values from fields that you've deleted or commented out in your editor. So next up, I'm going to show you like another way that you can sort of get confused with this kind of stuff as well. Let's extend this scene a little bit here. So we're gonna create a new 3D object, and we're just gonna create a plane for our cube to sit on top of, right? And then we're gonna take that plane and we're gonna make it static, and we're gonna put it on, I guess default layer is fine. And then we want to add some like lighting. I think I'm missing a tab here. This might be something with a new version of Unity. I think they changed where they put the lighting options or something like that. Window. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting because in my other one, in my other project, I've got lighting windows here and navigation windows. Oh, maybe that's because I like actually drag them in there. Okay, that's better. Yeah, so let's bake this. We're gonna take off auto generate and we're gonna do baked, and let's see, generate lighting. Okay, there we go. Good. So now we've got a folder with the lighting data. Let's just see, where's my navigation? Yeah, navigation. Okay, perfect. There we go. And then now we're going to bake some navigation mesh onto this as well. So now we've got a nav mesh. Okay, cool. So you can see in this sample scene folder here, we've got nav mesh and lighting data. So next up, we're going to go back to the inspector here, and we're just going to make sure that this this original scene here, if I right click on this and go select dependencies, I think I've removed my dev cube from it. Okay, so let's go back in and create the dev cube bug again. So we're going to create the dev cube bug by opening this up, unserializing this, going back into your inspector and adding the dev cube. Okay, great. And we're going to apply that to the game manager. We're going to save this. And then we're going to comment out the field. Save that again. Let that field disappear. And then just confirm that if we go into our scene here and select dependencies, we still see the dev cube. Okay, good. So You're with me so far? Now we're going to do something a little more interesting, and this is another way to trigger this sort of bug. We're going to duplicate the scenes, and now we've got scenes 1 here. And we're going to go into scenes 1, and we've got our sample scene here. And we're going to rename this to sample scene 1. And we're going to double click and we're going to open sample scene 1. So now we're in sample scene 1, and you can see we've got our nav mesh and stuff. So now in sample scene 1, let's right click on that and let's go select dependencies, and there you can see our dev cube, which is really interesting because in sample scene 1 you're like, okay, yeah, there's nothing in there, right? So you know that you've got a hidden reference to the dev cube sitting inside your spawn manager, right? So okay, cool, no worries, right? I'll just delete that hidden reference to the dev cube, and then I'll go into sample scene 1 and I'll go select dependencies, and whoa, what the heck? There's a reference to the dev cube there, and you're wondering like, what is going on here, right? And you're like, well, what's holding that reference to the dev cube? You like delete everything in your scene, and you go to the sample scene, and you go select dependencies, and you've still got a reference to the dev cube. And you're thinking like, what the heck? How can a scene that literally has no objects in it have a reference to the dev cube? And the answer is a little bit nefarious here. It's actually because your sample scene 1 was using nav mesh data that was copied from another scene. It's actually pointing somehow to like the nav mesh data, or linked it somehow to the nav mesh data in the other scene over here. And then it does like some recursive thing where it finds every dependency of that other scene as well. So you can delete that folder with like the baked nav mesh data and stuff in it. And if we go select dependencies here, you'll see we still have the dev cube. And so you're thinking like, wow, like this scene literally, it has nothing in it. It is completely empty. There's no subfolders. We've deleted every subfolder, and we still have a reference to this silly dev cube somehow, right? If you clear the nav mesh data here that was sitting like basically in thin air, and you resave the scene, then now if I go select dependencies, I've still got it, right? So what I actually need to do, yeah, this gets really bad here, is I think I have to regenerate the lighting here. So now I've got like basically new lighting data, and now I can go select dependencies and it's gone. So you have to not only regenerate the lighting, but also clear the nav mesh, even though those 2 subfolders in here or the subfolder was completely deleted. And unlike any of the other ways that this bug can basically rear its ugly head, this one is by far the most confusing to the user, because in all other cases you at least have some sort of prefab in your scene. But in this way of triggering this hidden references bug, you don't even have any prefabs in your scene, so there's like literally nothing in your inspector for you to even compare or check overrides against. And that's why this way of this bug happening is by far the most nefarious. So I hope you enjoyed that. I really hope that this saves you some time, because I've demonstrated 3 ways that this bug can appear, and like, that's no joke. More than half of that episode was spent troubleshooting this stuff and looking through empty scenes and trying to figure out how these references appear. So if you like this type of content and you'd like to see more of it in the future, then don't forget to thumbs up the video, subscribe to the Cohesion YouTube channel, or just leave a note in the comments. And thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time.